So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Again, my name is Gary Baracco, Vice President of Industry Development for ecVision, and thank you for attending. I know some of our friends and customers are out there, and also some connections from RAP. So we planned this webinar, and it was going to take place a few weeks ago on the one-year anniversary of some of the most disastrous factory issues that have happened in the apparel and footwear industry in a long time. But we waited a few weeks later, and we even have more timely information to share with you. So I want to introduce Lisa Berg, who's a Senior Account Manager with ecVision.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
And also, most of you have probably interacted with the people from Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production, or RAP. And with us today is Avedis Seferian, who's the President and CEO of that organization.
Hi, everybody.
So we're going to just, we'll go ahead to the agenda next, and your projector, your control. Shift, okay. So first of all, we're going to take a quick look back at some of the events that I mentioned and where we've gone, but also a summary of the developments that have happened since the Rana Plaza disaster. Also, Avedis is going to share with us where things stand today, what the compliance trends are going forward, and then Lisa from ecVision is going to jump in and talk about transparency and visibility using technology tools. So, right, and then any of the social and labor concerns that are still popping up. And last, the benefits from ecVision. And we'll conclude with a question and answer. If you want to submit any questions, then you could use the chat box, and I'll be fielding those questions for you. So now I'm going to pass presenter over to Avedis.
Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are. I'm told we have attendees from all over the world, so thank you all for joining us. Special appreciation for those of you who are joining out from Asia, where it's kind of late already. We'll try and keep you awake through the next 45 minutes or so. And one way to sort of start that wake-up process is to take a quick tour through the rather jarring events from a year and a half to about a year ago that we are sort of using as the backdrop for and the context for what we mean by a year later. The hyper attention that social compliance has been receiving of late traces its current addition probably to the fire at the Ali Enterprises factory in Pakistan, which took place on September 11th, 2012. Over 300 lives were lost, and it garnered a lot of attention worldwide, from headlines such as the New York Times anger and grief across Karachi after fire, to the BBC even going so far as to suggest that this was a blaze that was waiting to happen. Next slide, please. Not too long after that, we had the factory fire at Tazreen Fashions in Bangladesh in November of that year. Again, fatal fire, loss of lives, and the Times taking that as, in the larger context, talking about the highlighting dangers facing garment workers across the industry. And more importantly, started seeing the backlash on the buyer community with this CNN headline, "Retailers and suppliers hit by fallout from deadly Bangladesh factory fire." Next slide, please. As we were still processing that, just a couple of months later in January, there was a fire at Smart Garments, also in Bangladesh. Again, you can see the kind of headlines it garnered. And not too long after that, next slide please, we had the tragedy at Rana Plaza on April 24th, 2013. 1,129 lives lost after the collapse of the building, and in addition to the headlines about building collapse, leaving scores dead, there was this really renewed attention paid to practices by the buying community, and the AP headline, "Big Brands Face Scrutiny Over Factory Safety After Bangladesh Collapse," really captured the overall mood that created, and really turbocharged the attention being paid to factory safety, fire safety, building and structural safety, and broadly speaking, social compliance with regards to sourcing practices. Next slide, please. As a result of Rana Plaza and you know, the preceding tragedies, multiple initiatives, international initiatives were formed in the months that followed. In May of 2013, the Accord on Fire and Building Safety in Bangladesh was created. Shortly thereafter, in July of 2013, the Alliance for Bangladesh Worker Safety was formed. These two together represent a whole lot of brands and retailers coming together to address the concerns around building and fire safety. The Accord primarily made up of European buyers, and the Alliance made up of North American buyers. Also in July of 2013, the Bangladeshi government, along with the ILO, announced the formation of what is the National Tripartite Plan of Action. Between the three of them, the plan is for all factories in Bangladesh to be inspected for fire and safety. The Accord and the Alliance are responsible for inspecting factories that their members source from, and what the National Tripartite Plan of Action is to cover are all the remaining factories in Bangladesh. While this was happening, the ILO increased its level of activity in Bangladesh as well. They announced the launch of the Better Work program in Bangladesh, although as of today they're still looking for a head for the program. And then earlier this year in February, the ILO formally established the Rana Plaza Donor Trust Fund, which aims to raise money to help pay for the families of those who lost their lives in this tragedy. The larger picture also saw a lot of changes. In the wake of Rana Plaza, Bangladesh approved a new labor law in July of 2013. One of the things that this new law did was to streamline the union registration system. Bangladesh had a bureaucratic process that had really stymied the registration of unions in the country. Most figures point to about 7 registered unions over the past decade. They streamlined the process, and in the years since this new law was approved, the number has risen now to about 200. More importantly, in some respects, the minimum wage was increased 77% in November of 2013, going up from what was before that 3,000 taka a month, which is approximately $38, to 5,300 taka a month, which is approximately $68. This is the minimum wage at the very low end of the scale. Most workers make a good deal more than that, but this provides the floor, and for them to have increased that floor by 77% was certainly a significant development. Next slide, please. So where do things stand today? When we talk about a year, social compliance a year later, it isn't simply about Bangladesh, although that has really been sort of the center of the social compliance universe in many ways. In Bangladesh, the Accord and the Alliance are just about done completing the first round of building inspections. Both of them recently, in July, published annual reports, each celebrating their one-year anniversary as well. And really the main takeaway for neutral observers from this is the Accord and the Alliance represent really an unprecedented collaboration and just an hitherto unknown increased level of transparency. They are together examples of brands cooperating in what is a pre-competitive environment. I mean, all of these members of the Alliance and all the brands who are members of the Accord are competitors. I mean, they're not out there to help each other in a business sense, but they all recognize that the challenges presented here are pre-competitive is the term often used, but really what it comes down to is they matter more than the latter competition in the market. So you're seeing just an incredible collaboration, and the likes of which have never been encountered in the industry before. And on the transparency side, again, you're seeing an incredible amount of transparency. Both the Accord and the Alliance have committed to publishing these factory reports online, and many of them are already up there, and more are to follow. So again, not something that has happened before, very different, so as far as where things stand today. More importantly, though, as I mentioned earlier, these are not simply developments limited to Bangladesh alone. The consequences of those tragedies are being felt throughout the world, and even though Bangladesh is highlighted as an example and is particularly salient in the level of activity that's going on there, the fact is that social compliance practices are evolving throughout the world for brands sourcing from anywhere on the planet, not just Bangladesh. Next slide, please. So, where do things stand today? The one thing that is quite obvious and hasn't changed in the wake of Rana Plaza is that the supply chain continues to be a very fragmented, complex, and worldwide supply chain. The days in which brands would source from owned and operated facilities that were in the same country as their headquarters is long gone and not about to come back. So we're in this fragmented, complex, and worldwide supply chain, which is further complicated by the fact that we live in a world today where modern technology enables 24/7 communication, global instant communication. So whatever happens, no matter what the event is, whether we're talking about an earthquake in China, or whether we're talking about continued violence in the Middle East or Ukraine, or whether we're talking about Ebola in Africa, it doesn't matter. Whether it's in China, Bangladesh, anywhere else on the planet, it appears on CNN or BBC within a matter of minutes or hours at most. And as I like to say, if it's bad news, it travels even faster. So what this has meant for the industry, for the apparel industry, is that reputation and supply chain management are now global issues. And this is actually true for any industry, but particularly so for apparel, which is such a brand-driven industry. And the stakes are higher than they've ever been. The choices are more easily available. Information is easily available, and so you've really got to be, as a brand manager, constantly aware of what's going on and proactively managing the risks to the brand's reputation. In addition, there is a greater awareness in general, not just among the buyers and the suppliers, but among the consuming public in general, of the need for more sustainable manufacturing practices, be it on environmental issues or, as recently demonstrated by these tragedies, tragic factory accidents, with regards to labor and social issues as well. So in this environment, we are entering the next phase of social compliance and sourcing practices. Next slide. And in that regard, the question is, what are the trends going forward? What do we expect to see in the days, months, and years ahead? To help with this question, but also as part of a broader exercise we conducted at RAP quite recently, we held a stakeholder outreach project, which was a tremendous success, if I do say so myself, trying to get a sense of where things stand, what the trends are, and what the thinking is about compliance, and obviously about RAP as well. We talked to 50 thought leaders in the social compliance arena, broadly speaking. We talked to brands, we talked to members of the socially responsible investing community, we talked to compliance practitioners, we talked to government staff as well as academia, and among other things, the discussion centered around social compliance trends. For those of you interested in the full report, by the way, you can easily download it off of our website, www.rapcompliance.org. For the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to focus on the social compliance trends that emerged as a result of the conversations, and there were four that came out. The first I've already touched upon is this focus on increased transparency. The understanding that, especially given today's 24/7 global communication and the ubiquity of the internet and the fact that anybody with a cell phone is now a reporter, potentially, the ability to control information is now out the window in terms of trying to prevent bad stuff from getting out. And so the one almost so paradoxical reaction is that it has meant that we now embrace more transparency, putting out the information instead of trying to control it because we know we can't. So that's definitely been one driver. And then there's also the benefits in increased transparency and recognizing the value of shared information in helping factories improve and helping prevent the need for duplicative effort in order to gather that self-same information. Another important trend that has become increasingly more salient is this movement towards greater engagement with the supply chain. Brands and retailers are now no longer simply plopping down a code and telling factories to comply or die. They are actually working with them to help improve them, to share best practices, to collaborate and create an environment of continuous improvement. So the social compliance world is moving away from just checklist audits and the pass-fail to more training, more direct working together to help drive the improvements that are necessary. And that is certainly a very positive trend. Tied to that is this third piece, which is the increase in collaboration, particularly within trusted relationships. As I mentioned already, the Accord and the Alliance represent really unprecedented levels of collaboration. And one of the things that has come from that is that they're proving the case that such collaboration is possible. And so that makes for more collaboration, and in particular for brands and retailers as well as third parties that have developed a relationship over time and have built the requisite level of trust. This allows for increased working together, and again, it sort of cascades onto more engagement as well as more transparency as the trust allows for both those things to happen. And finally, and of particular interest to this webinar and the partnership that we have with ecVision, is the clear emergence of a trend for a greater role for technology. Technology has come such a long way, and I don't just mean now in the broader context of a ubiquitous internet, but in regards to report sharing platforms, with regards to data gathering platforms, and the ability to have that information and have it readily available and have it in verifiable and credible format actually fosters all of the other trends. It allows for greater transparency, it allows for easier engagement, and it helps to create that trust. So in this context, it becomes important to identify good technology partners, and certainly RAP, we're very happy at RAP to be working with ecVision on this. And on that note, I will actually hand over to Lisa from ecVision, who will take the webinar forward and talk about how technology can actually help meet those needs. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you, Avedis, and hello, everyone. My name is Lisa Berg, and I am from, as we've said, ecVision. ecVision offers a supply chain solution for global brands and retailers to enhance their visibility and transparency into their supply chain process. Today, I will be addressing the industry challenges of facility compliance. Whoop. Ryan, I don't see the webinar anymore.
We're trying to give you control this time, and
Okie dokie.
So that you don't have to keep doing what poor Avedis had to do and say next slide, next slide. No. There we go. Now, Lisa, go ahead and hit OK, and just put your mouse on the slide. And Minimize. Minimize that. Okay. You got it, Lee?
Let's see. Oh, yeah, there we go.
We go.
Okay. So I'm just going to go back one. All right, we'll just go back one. And so years ago, just to kind of give a little background, years ago the origins of your company's products used to be pretty murky. And beyond the actual supply chain function, virtually no one cared where their products came from. Of course, all that's changed now. Consumers, governments, stakeholders, and stockholders are demanding details about the sources and systems that manufacture and deliver our goods. They worry about quality, safety, ethics, and environmental impact. Far-sighted organizations are directly addressing new threats and opportunities presented by this simple question: where does this stuff come from? Okay, great. So it takes years to create a brand name and the recognition of that name. And with a harmful recall or disasters like Rana Plaza, it could take only minutes to destroy it. After Rana Plaza, many of our clients were calling us to learn if using the ecVision compliance reporting tool could help them understand if they had products being made in those factories. Having these reports could immediately remediate the situation. This expanded into creating better visibility and transparency into understanding where their factories are located and what products they were making where. So it became not only where's my stuff, but where's my stuff being made. Driven by growing calls for create better visibility and transparency, new technologies, which is why someone from a software provider is talking to you now, have emerged and are being embraced by brands and retailers. In time, everyone from supplier to consumer will perceive easy access to such information as the everyday norm. Revealing origins of products will become an essential part of establishing trust and securing your brand reputation. Aside from the social and label concerns that Avedis has already shown us and shared with us, and that were revealed after the Rana Plaza collapse and other disasters, there are still other areas that need to be addressed. For instance, child and forced labor issues revolving around Uzbekistan cotton. Consider the trouble an obscure supply chain can cause. Most iPhone owners probably don't think about where their devices come from and where they're made, but worker suicides at Foxconn, one of Apple's major Chinese suppliers, forced the company to pull the curtain back on part of its supply chain in 2009. It had to repress claims that it relied on sweatshop labor, but in December 2013, reports still showed that the production facility exceeded the allowed working hours. And so you think that this isn't happening in the apparel industry, but look at this report from ILO, the International Labor Organization, and it shows us that the estimated number of workers working under forced labor conditions still exists today. Only in the last 6 years or so has environmental, ethical, and product safety been a major sore spot for sourcing teams. However, brands and retailers have made tremendous strides to provide traceability and transparency. International clothing retailer H&M, for example, declares that it strives to improve labor practices and minimize the adverse environmental effects of not only its suppliers, but its suppliers' suppliers, right back along the chain. Similar claims, once reserved to a handful of niche retailers, have become widespread. But until recently, customers had a limited view of supply chains. Even companies themselves have often not been able to ask lots of questions about the origins and pathways of the goods that they source. Here's a recent retail report from Free to Work that identifies companies by name, showing their performance in traceability and visibility. The lighter shades are the companies that are more compliant with regard to modern slavery. There are still a lot of dark shades. Quite enlightening.
Hey, Lisa.
Yes.
It's really interesting. I'm watching the attentiveness of our attendees, and as soon as you showed a slide that had all of their companies listed on it, the ratio went up. So I'm sure we could hear them chuckling right now. So, but if you want to go back to that slide, you and I spent about a half hour the other day picking through this. Mm-hmm. And when we're done, the webinar will be recorded, but you can also find this graphic out there. It's amazing to see that in this area, there's 3 different areas that ILO studied, the cut and make and the raw production and the actual textile or fabric development were the 3 different areas. And they look at workers' rights and how well retailers or brands are monitoring and what their traceability levels are. So like you mentioned, the lighter colors are the better ones, and some of those darker colors where you can see almost the whole supply chain is dark is indicative that those brands or retailers do not have any programs in effect for traceability, for monitoring, or for workers' right enforcement. So
you're right, Garrett. This is very enlightening, and I think it's a good shout out to a lot of companies to see the areas that they really need to start addressing probably a little bit more deeply.
Right. Okay. Thanks. We just had such a good time looking at that slide together. I thought we might share it a little longer with our audience.
Yes, it is quite enlightening. Okay. So now that we're talking about technology to enhance visibility, just wanted to share with you some of the business benefits that using a technology to manage your facility compliance can offer. So the whole idea is to minimize your risks that are associated with regulatory compliance, codes of conduct, and ethical sourcing to help protect your brand integrity. You want to be able to collaborate and work with your suppliers and multiple audit companies and share this information in real time. To be able to have increased enterprise compliance levels with true transparency and consolidated data. So data is held in real time for everyone to access. You're able to track and manage all of your corrective action plans from start to completion, and you can create recurring audits and schedule them through automation so that you can do it on 6 months, yearly, whatever works for you, and make sure that everybody stays up to date. All of the information that's put into the system can then produce meaningful reports to help measure compliance and capture any type of indexes and KPIs that you'd like. And the whole idea is to be able to have this information for historical purposes so that you can relate to it in a later day. So how much is too much information? Demand for visibility from consumers and stakeholders alike in this industry that has yet to be determined. But with the collaborative efforts between world-class and conscious brands, raw material providers and suppliers, in conjunction with technology providers, information sharing is now a true and necessary reality. So just to summarize a bit, retailers and brand owners of any size are ultimately and legally responsible to employ the necessary means to ensure regulatory guidelines are met regarding product safety and supplier, social, human rights, and chemical compliance within their entire supply chain. An international supply chain can gain the benefits derived from ecVision Suite's best practices, including minimize your risk of noncompliance through increased transparency, determine the vulnerability for risk throughout your supply chain, reduce costs of recalls or fines by managing this information more efficiently, reduce delays in production by utilizing approved suppliers and materials, ensure compliance based on the country and receipt of those goods, view your milestone exceptions for root cause of fines, recalls, and legal action, calculate key performance measures for your suppliers, analyze trend analysis for specific materials, suppliers, and/or regions, and collaborate more on resources being used for supplier remediation, identify suppliers using non-compliant suppliers. So I hope we were able to share with you that there is a way to manage this information to help you and your company have enhanced visibility into your process. This visibility could truly help to alleviate major issues in the future. I'll now pass it back to Avedis for his final thoughts.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, so in conclusion, the overall message here is that social compliance is playing an increasingly important role in sourcing decision-making. There's no denying that anymore. It's no longer a nice-to-have or an afterthought. It's very much part of the decision-making. It's baked into it, and it's getting an incredibly high level of attention. And technology is now more integrated as part of the process, as part of the information gathering process, as part of the whole decision-making process. Given the clear trends emerging in compliance practices, we are seeing how technology greatly enables some of those trends. We talked about the increased transparency and the increased engagement. These two in particular are really made easier because of the advances in technology, especially with regards to information gathering and sharing. Ultimately, when it comes to decision-making and making sure you get it right, it's about building trusted relationships. It's about making sure you understand your supply chain, and those relationships are not simply those between the buyer and the supplier, but also the right partnership that you can sort of tap into between technology providers and on-the-ground experts. And here we can give ecVision and RAP as respective examples of this, even if it is somewhat self-serving. Such partnerships will create the solutions that will allow those in the supply chain making the decisions to do so in the most effective and efficient manner. And given the stakes, given the risks, given the issues that Lisa highlighted on the summary slide, it is extremely important that the folks tasked with this decision-making do get it right, and we're here to help. On that note, I think we have time left over for some Q&A. Gary, how do we want to do this?
Yep. So I'm fielding the questions here in the chat box, and one of the very lengthy, I think it's more of a statement than a question, is the discussion about how buyers, brands and retailers, need to take into account all of these standards of compliance. And, you know, if they just want the cheaper price, if our consumers only want the cheaper price, then there needs to be some sort of a shift in our thinking, both as consumers and as brands and retailers. And I know that, you know, it took the loss of many lives for us to do that, but I'm sure that this is at the forefront. I mean, can you talk about both viewpoints, whether it be from the brand or retailer or from the suppliers and factories looking for this emphasis?
Sure. I certainly agree with the sentiment in general. There's no question that it is a responsibility shared across the supply chain. It's not just the factories that have a responsibility in making sure that the conditions in their workplaces are safe. Buyers also have a responsibility in making sure, A, that they identify the right partners, that they don't reward bad factories with more orders and thereby send a terrible signal to the supply chain, but also to make sure that their own sourcing practices are not creating the kinds of conditions that would foster suppliers to work excessive overtime or push price levels to such extremes that would lead to the kind of cost-cutting, corner-cutting measures that could put workers' lives at risk. The broader point to keep in mind, however, here is that we live in most parts of the world at any rate, a sort of a modern capitalist economy, and so there's always going to be pressure to do things more efficiently, and that means to lower costs, that means to improve lead times. So those drivers are themselves not bad things. They help make things better. They help improve options and help reduce prices to consumers. What we have to be very careful about is that this sort of capitalist mentality should not mean, it should not follow from that we accept subpar working conditions, that we accept lower costs, lower prices at the cost of workers' lives. That, I think, is what ultimately has been underlined so emphatically by the tragedy at Rana Plaza, and that kind of awakening hopefully now is permanent and has reset the thinking and recognized the shared responsibility across the supply chain. But absolutely, I agree with the broader sentiment expressed in that statement.
Yeah, and another statement along those same lines was, well, if you look at the folks who are holding the webinars and who are talking about compliance, rarely do we see brands and retailers stepping up and talking about broadly the initiatives that they're taking. But I can tell you that we have seen that brands and retailers are participating. Look at the Alliance and the Accord. Look at all of the effort that's gone into that. I know we heard from the Alliance a few weeks ago when we were in Portland, Avedis, and I think the numbers that came from the Alliance was that they had educated 1 million factory workers in the last year and empowered like 2,000 and change, 2,500 coaches and leaders within those factory workers, but the education process had to be readdressed because that was what the issue was, that we were educating in the wrong way. As brands and retailers, we were approaching making assumptions. And so now with the investments that the brands and retailers are making in that, I think we really see a difference. The other thing is, you mentioned, another question that came in was, you mentioned that other countries have seen a marked increase in social change and education along the lines of compliance. Are there any other countries that are noteworthy to you?
Sure. As I said, the reverberations have been felt across the supply chain. So other countries in Southeast Asia in particular that have become sourcing destinations of choice for brands and retailers in the West are seeing increased attention being paid to compliance practices there. And the obvious ones that come to mind, I mean, China has always been in the picture, but increases in Vietnam and Cambodia in particular are noteworthy. A particular example of the kind of point that we're making here is as the world sort of decides how they want to enter Myanmar or Burma as a sourcing destination, we're seeing a lot of collaboration and cooperation from brands and retailers ahead of time, talking about, can we possibly do things right, right off the bat here in Myanmar. So that's probably now a when, not if, there will be sourcing out of there, and so that's going to be worth watching to see how that plays out.
Yeah, no, those are all great points, and I think that we also have seen a marked emphasis. I think I read the news today. There was a factory worker strike today somewhere. I don't remember if it was China or if it was in Bangladesh, but I think that empowering the factory workers is an important part. You talked about embracing transparency has become so much of a norm nowadays, and we're seeing more and more of that from a technology provider. Not only are the mutual customers that we have asking for transparency and visibility into the social audits, the product tests, the tier 2 and 3 supply streams as well. But we're also seeing the transparency for the consumer happening more and more in making that available at the consumer level. So I think that all of the initiatives that are taking place, I do believe that brands and retailers do have a wholehearted commitment into improving social accountability and social responsibility. I know there's a lot of money being spent in these areas and a lot of emphasis because generally we do care. And as a technology provider teaming with an organization like Worldwide Responsible Accredited Production and the other organizations that we do work with, I think that is the key to providing that level of visibility and transparency for everyone. Final comment?
Absolutely. No, just echoing all your thoughts and reiterating the point that unlike previous instances where we've had a tragedy that briefly raised the profile of compliance and then things unfortunately went back to the old way of doing things, I think we are at the point now where this is a bit of a crossing of the Rubicon. There's no turning back after this. We are permanently resetting expectations, and the resulting evolution in practices are going to represent the next stage, not simply a phase, but a next stage. And the fact that technology has enabled some of these changes to be made more easily and more permanently is driving some of that, and we are hopefully going to not ever have to deal with such a horrific event again.
Right, and I agree. All right, so we'll wrap up and thank everybody for taking time in their lunch or after lunch hour. Within a day or so, we should have the video posted to ecVision's YouTube channel if you'd like to share that link with other members in your organization. Otherwise, thanks to Lisa and Avedis for your time today, and thank you to everyone for attending. Have a great day.
Thank you, Gary, and thank you, everyone.